The immutable fact that deep down we've always known, but until now have been utterly unable to prove. It's in the title. FF14 players cannot be trusted. Why, you ask? How do I know this? Well, it's simple. So a couple of days ago I was doom-scrolling twitter.com, and in amongst the flagrant political statements and the worst AI posts you've ever seen, I came across a tweet by a fellow content creator. They were taking a community survey on players' most and least favourite jobs, as well as collating the most popular reasons as to why those jobs were particularly liked or disliked. I actually find this really interesting conceptually, just because job design and discussion in general is something I really enjoy in this game, so I kept a tab on it and went on with my life. Now the results are in, so in today's video we'll be looking through the results and reasonings, drawing some conclusions and figuring out exactly why FF14 players cannot be trusted. This entire survey was based on 3,230 responses, so whilst the sample size is pretty small in relation to the overall player base, we can draw some conclusions from them and have a chat about them in the spirit of fun. I'll go through it role by role and then talk a little more overarching at the end, so there will be chapters that you can skip through for the initial role-by-role discussions. When it comes to FF14's tanks, the least favourite tank was cited as Paladin, and the most favourite was Dark Knight, with about 9% of votes separating the two. I found this interesting. It's fair to say that Dark Knight has a strong aesthetic appeal, and I immediately expected that its edgy outward appearance and its animations would play into one of the main factors in people preferring it over the cut-and-dry good boy Paladin, though of course it wasn't as simple as that. The most common listed reasons for players citing Dark Knight as their favourite were the Blackest Night, the fact that it's a magic tank, that it's good for endgame raiding, that its resource management is engaging, that it has the best story questline. Nothing in particular noted about its aesthetics, which surprised me. These reasons are interesting because TBN is often criticised for being different than its short tank CD siblings, for having a risk-reward cost where others don't. But for me, personally, I agree. I like risk-reward, and I like that there is an additional skill and timing ceiling to using TBN well. You can always tell when your Dark Knight is good because they're popping TBN for autos, busters, on allies for raid wides to save them, and everywhere in between, and they're timing them all precisely enough that they all pop. Unfortunately, most people that big up the Edge Knight are not doing that. Those that chose Gunbreaker as their favourite cited that they loved it, firstly because of Squall, and secondly, and I quote, the complexity of the rotation and all the buttons to press. Personally, I've never thought of Gunbreaker as particularly complicated inherently, but I can understand the point as it does play differently to the other tanks, especially considering that Dark Knight and Warrior are rotationally very streamlined and similar to one another. Paladin likers enjoyed it because of a mixture of physical and magical attacks, as well as its good mitigation. Paladin is really strong in progression or recovery scenarios, thanks to having a million tools to aid in it. Clemency and cover and intervention and wings on top of the standard roll-wide stuff. And getting out of those situations are what good memories are made of, so I honestly expected Paladin to get a little more love. Warrior lovers were nothing if not stereotypical, citing sage arguments such as Unga Bunga, Primal Rend, and Heals in all caps as their reasons for preferring it. But I found the reasons for disliking jobs much more worth discussion, so I'll show them all here and we'll pick some out that raised an eyebrow a little more. The first one I liked was that literally every tank has some variation of the rotation is boring, or the rotation is overcomplicated, which is especially funny in the case of Warrior and Dark Knight, whom share many of the major keynotes within their rotations. It's like saying a large glass of orange juice tastes way better than a small glass of orange juice. They're the same, it's just different volumes. People hate Paladin because it has a quote-unquote terrible storyline, and because the rotation is somehow simultaneously boring and confusing, apparently. I dunno, man. It's basically just 1, 2, 3 with extra steps for the vast majority of its runtime. Use your spells, pop your stacks before you finish your next 3, done. Warrior was criticised for being too powerful with healing, and a quote-unquote master of everything. Yeah, I suppose it is a master of everything if we pretend that DPS and targeted mitigation and recovery and aesthetic don't count within the bounds of everything. My first toxic thought is that it comes across as if somebody considers dungeons to be the only metric of value. It would be like me considering raids as the only metric of value. Warrior has places in which it excels, but it also has pretty clear-cut numerous drawbacks. It's by no means a master of everything. Conversely, I think Dark Knight isn't squishy at all in raids and isn't hurting for personal heals whatsoever. These arguments have to be built on the basis of dungeon runs. When it comes to healers, Sage was voted the most popular and Scholar the least popular, with the regen healers sitting around the middle. This was fully expected, as Sage and Scholar in many ways fill the same role and play in similar enough fashions to be interchangeable, but Sage requires so much less effort to pull off well, and has a huge margin for error, and it has little floating laser guns as opposed to an encyclopedia and Tinkerbell. White Mage's most common reasons for dislike were amazing though. White Mage mains are too cocky or rude. I can't say this is an issue I've run into. I have ran into the stereotypical clueless White Mage a couple of hundred times, but not the cocky misery Marvin too much. It feels like this one is born of some deep-seated personal hatred. There's something going on there. The next point, that White Mage's DPS is so overwhelmingly high compared to all other healers, especially its selfish healer counterpart Sage. That's interesting though, because of how it shows such an abject misunderstanding of damage contribution in FF14. Your damage contribution is not just the product of the red numbers you throw at the boss, but of a combination of that plus what you provide to your allies. Sometimes this is reflected on damage value websites like FFLogs by factoring in your raid DPS from buffs as well as your personal damage, but in healers especially, sometimes it doesn't show up at all. Specifically, the damage you gain your co-healer through efficient healing. If you're able to gain your co-healer 2 or 3 damage GCDs at the cost of just one of your own, the group's damage has gone up due to your contribution, although most people won't even be aware that you put that value in. With that said, you don't even need to go that deeply to know that Astro is the king of damage contribution in 8-man content at least. It has incredibly potent buffs, amazing OGCD healing potential that can boost their co-healer significantly, and spreads those OGCD tools well between single target and AoE for planned healing and for recovery. In most 8-man content, but not all, it kinda depends on the fight, White Mage struggles to even pass Sage, and is far behind both Scholar and Astro in damage contribution. It's why I don't play White Mage for progression despite far preferring its playstyle to Astro. Astro is just too good. Speaking of Astro, it was stated that it's the hardest healer both as a positive and a negative. Some stated that it's too much work or takes too many buttons for the lowest output damage-wise, which we now know is incorrect. Others said they felt rewarded for nailing the rotation. For me personally, I think playing Scholar well is a little bit tougher than Astro, but the difference isn't massive. Healers in general have been simplified quite heavily, and they have so many tools that you often are not punished very hard of late for playing suboptimally, so I think it could be a fair point. That its card system is complicated though? That's a very outdated opinion. I think the argument could have been made in Endwalker or even before that, but now it is literally as simple as play your damage cards on the 2 minutes and use the other cards whenever you feel like, but they don't even really matter that much. That's it. There's no moment-to-moment adjustment, no intense thought. It's only marginally more difficult than using a skill like Dragon Sight used to be. I do have to defend my boy White Mage at least a little bit though, because apparently a prevailing sentiment is that Sage is just a better White Mage with shields. White Mage has shields. They're just on a really long cooldown, but they have them. More to the point, regen and shield healers are just intrinsically different. Sage cannot perma-top HP bars on demand repeatedly like White Mage can. They have to use a long cooldown of their own to attain the same effect. The jobs have different strengths, and each brings some value. I do agree entirely that Sage's skill names are confusing though. I need a Google Translate to make them the same as Scholar's. There is one point nailed onto regarding Scholar I do very much agree with though, in that the kit fights against itself. This was fine in Stormblood era FF14, but in present day where we have jobs like Sage, in which you have to consider nothing at all, it feels weird to be playing a comparable job with so many arbitrary constraints. Seraphism and Seraph and Fey Union and Fey Blessing and Dissipation are all still at odds with one another, and it feels like the job could use some coherency in its rulings regarding that, as more and more abilities are added into the mix and each possesses their own weird lockouts from one another as well. I'm not surprised to see that Sage is much more popular, despite Scholar being a more powerful job in most regards. On the melee DPS front, Monk is the overall least favourite, and in a move that was baffling to me at first, but when I factored in the rule of cool I suppose it makes sense, Reaper was the most favourite. I thought it was odd because I genuinely consider Reaper to be the most boring DPS of all. I hate its filler because it feels like I'm playing at the speed of a slug trapped in glue, which acts as a jarring contrast to the burst windows that feel nice and button intensive, even if you are pressing the same thing in the same order practically every time. But it has really cool animations and a good thematic identity, which I think is likely the biggest factor in making it a popular choice. Funnily enough, Monk received the most votes for least favourite and Reaper received the most votes for most favourite, but the job that received the least votes for most favourite was not Monk. It was instead Ninja. So whilst many people really actively dislike the way Monk plays at the moment, it has its community of die-hard enjoyers that stand by it more so than Ninja does. For me personally, I'd prefer a job to have a level of contention like that and have people either love it or hate it, than it be fairly forgettable and enjoyed by so few. So Monk has to score some points for that at least. For me personally, I think Dragoon and Samurai are the most fun melee DPS at the moment, with Samurai possessing the most moment-to-moment decision-making to play really well. I honestly love the fact that you can hold on to your second blast of the Madare for burst windows or delaying positionals. I think that is really neat. Regarding the specific feedback, apparently every single melee DPS has a boring rotation. There isn't a single job in the category that managed to escape that criticism unscathed. Monk got flamed because the current dawntrail iteration apparently feels 10 times worse than old Monk, in which I assume they mean Endwalker Monk. And honestly, as an Endwalker Monk enjoyer, I'd agree that the previous iteration was more interesting to play and enjoyable to master. Dawntrail's Monk fell into the trap many jobs have in the past, sacrificing what made it unique and interesting in an attempt to chase a higher play rate, but not getting it anyway. It also claimed that Monk is too confusing, that counting is hard, and that it has no ranged attack. Six-Sided Star would like a word. Whilst technically not ranged, it does kind of enable you to peel, and that's what it's there for. It's funny that Monk is apparently both boring and too hard at the same time. Even better, though, is the criticism Reaper received. In the negative section, it was claimed to be too boring, whereas in the praise section, people said that it's easy, which is a positive to them. So the job is both too boring, bad, and nice and easy, good. The best criticism I saw, though, is that people claimed they didn't like Reaper because it insists that you commune with a demon. I hate to be the one to tell you, but unfortunately, you kill many animals in FF14 as well. You ain't free of sin, so you might as well just take the cool demon sidekick. Ninja players hated the bunny, which is valid, and Samurai players disliked that positionals felt bad, apparently. It's curious that Samurai in particular received this criticism. Personally, I'm a positional defender. I am absolutely not in favour of peeling even more depth away from melee DPS, especially when you have 2 stacks of True North and a relatively small number of them to hit with low punishment in the first place. In the same way that executing a phase perfectly and getting full uptime can feel rewarding, so too can managing to hit all your positionals. Some liked Viper a lot more before Square Enix made it easier a week or two after the expansion launch, and personally I'd agree that the job released in a really interesting and fun position, and that its current iteration is lesser. Then others mentioned that it has the best DPS output, and that's good, which is interesting because in the majority of fights that is definitely not the case. For physical range DPS, the most disliked overall was Bard, and the most appreciated was Dancer. It's interesting because I had somewhat expected the black sheep of the role, Machinist, to sit somewhere that wasn't smack bang in the centre of it all. I personally like Machinist a lot despite its balance woes. It's fun to play, and I enjoy the way its gauge function. It's actually fairly interesting to want to send your robot a different number of times at different levels of gauge on different timings in order to stockpile well for the 2 minutes and not overcap. At least it's more interesting than just blow everything in bursts being the only factor you consider. People criticised it for being thematically inconsistent, stating that it should just use a gun. I'm no lore expert, but aren't they wrong? It's Machinist, not Gunmancer. Machinist, the weapons manufacturers for Ishgard that work on cannons and ballistas and advanced armaments. It would make sense that they've built a tailor-made set of tools and use them in tandem rather than just being Gunslinger Gordon. Bard got some weird scathing criticism. People disliking that it has 2 dots, disliking that you cut songs in the rotation, and disliking that it's a combat job instead of a role-playing one in the first place? Honestly, and I hate to be harsh, half of the reasons here are utterly nonsensical. But hey, at least for the one guy that loves it, he gets to have the good itch scratched, which, good for him. Dancer players don't like the stigma that comes with being a queen, which I mean, if you can't handle it, get off the stage I guess, and that it has a low amount of personal DPS. Whereas fans like that it has good weapons and is easy. Over on the caster front, Red Mage was voted most enjoyable, and Summoner the least favourite. I actually expected Pictomancer to do better here, but the Summoner pick comes as no surprise to me at all. I feel like Summoner is the greatest case of job design failing. Whilst older iterations of Summoner were messy, they were a unique niche within the game and had both depth and fans. A bit like Monk. I could see a reason for the rework, but after it, those fans quickly evaporated, and what was left in its place were people that played it because it was easy and strong, and people that didn't like it. There are relatively few that are fans specifically for the nuance of Summoner's gameplay. When it stopped being so strong, its play rate fell through the floor. It's okay to have easy jobs and hard jobs in my opinion, and if anything a good thing, but Summoner feels devoid, empty. Once the sheen of the flashy animations wear off, there's nothing left to appreciate. It is an okay core of a job, but Dawntrail added nothing meaningful to it whatsoever. Had it managed that, I feel like it would have built up steam and accrued many more fans, and potentially become one of the more popular jobs in the category. Alas, sorry for the rant, but man, the state of Summoner is not great as far as I'm concerned. Black Mage was criticised for taking too long to get going in the leveling process, and I agree, that job is horrible until like level 70 or 80. Please fix Square Enix. I expected this to be a bit of a Marmite job though. It still possesses some non-standard rotations and a lot of transpose craft to play at high levels, and that requires planning. It's okay for the job to be Marmite, and I don't think that's an indictment of it. It's my personal favourite caster for sure at the moment, closely followed by Red Mage. Red Mages said that it feels quote-unquote awful gameplay-wise, and yet provided no additional context, but enjoyers stated that they enjoy its strengths. The fact that it's a melee caster hybrid, its animations and aesthetics, and how much versatile utility they offer to a run. Honestly, I really like the praise Red Mages get because you can tell those people really enjoy their job, and they're being a bit more specific, and I respect that a lot. Pictomancer players either love the aesthetic or hate the rotation. I think this entire thing is very interesting. There are a lot of outdated assertions about jobs. I think that in part comes from the fact that a lot of people will try something out, not vibe with it, and then quickly and with purpose discard it, form their opinion, and then lock that opinion in forever. I don't think that's a terrible thing to do, but every job has at least some appreciators, and that's because there's something to like about them. Even Summoner. It's interesting because there's this big disparity in job knowledge, even amongst active endgame players, and people who likely main one of the jobs they discussed, and this definitely leads into one of the main pitfalls that I worry Square Enix might fall into in the future regarding job design. Ironically, listening too much. I don't mean to sound preachy, but for me, the most important thing about jobs in this game are that firstly, they feel unique to play from one another, and secondly, that the design team has a clear vision for them, and follow that through line in both the visual and the mechanical rotation. That's it. Some can be overpowered in certain scenarios and poor in others. I don't care. If anything, balance and people pleasing is less important than creating something memorable. Maybe the developers completely disagree. That's okay, I suppose, but the thing about jobs is that you play them in everything. Every single piece of battle content. Dungeons and trials and normals and savage and ultimate. If jobs shine, every fight in the game shines. If they're boring, the fight design needs to work that much harder to keep players hooked. I hope that next expansion, all people from all points of view get a version of their favourite job that they really love. It's okay if they actively dislike more of them, as long as they can find some that they in turn actively love. It's a lot better than apathy, at least. Please do consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube member like these fine folk, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.